Hello everyone and welcome to this tutorial series where I'm going to be showing you how to make a game using the Code Studio Game Lab. What we're going to be making is a game that is somewhat inspired by Pac-Man. I'm going to trust all you young little whippersnappers out there have played Pac-Man before. If you haven't, you're just... I don't even know what to say. Anyway, the idea behind this game, as I play it, is that we're going to control a sprite that looks like a person. This is our player character. I did a terrible job there. And we are trying to collect these gold coins that appear while avoiding these UFOs that are trying to get you. And you can see too that as we pick up coins, it's adding our total coins we collected in the corner. And again, if we touch one of the UFOs, it's game over. Sorry, we died. So it's a simple game, but it's going to teach us a lot of important concepts, and you're going to be free to make this game as complicated and in-depth as you'd like, or go on to make something entirely different. So the way these tutorials are going to work is that I will, again, show you how I'm making this game, and I want you to follow along as I do that. Go ahead and pause the video after I do some things to our code so you can do the same to your own code. And occasionally I'm going to give you some challenges where I'm not going to directly tell you how to do something. I'm going to want to see if you can figure it out yourself, but don't worry, I will always show you the solution so you can double check how you did. The way we're going to build this game too is that we're not going to try to build the whole entire thing at once. As you can see, the code I have, this ends up being well over 100 lines of code. This would be way too much to try to think about all at once. So we're going to use what's called an iterative approach, and this is what's usually done in the game dev community, where we're going to try to build just one or two simple components to our game at a time and slowly build on more to it. This is going to make it much more manageable, and it's also going to help us to track down our problems when things don't quite work out. So let's go ahead and get started. So when you log into Code Studio, you should be on your dashboard. And I want you to scroll down the page and look down here for this button that says Game Lab. This is going to start a brand new Game Lab project for you. Now the very first thing we need to do, get in the habit of doing this right away. Let's hit rename and rename it to something else. I'm going to make the screen a little bit bigger for us. Yeah, that's better. All right, let's rename this. How about, we're going to call this Dodge Game. So Dodge Game. And then I want you to add something like Part 1 to the end of it. Because again, we're going to be doing this in steps or iterations. So we can resave each individual step in case we make a big boo-boo. We can go back to what we did before and not lose all the work we did. So let's save it. And now we're ready to go. So with the blank project, all we have in our workspace is just one block, and it's our draw loop. Now, if you remember, the draw loop is going to be the main loop of our program. It's going to run whatever we put in this loop over and over and over again as long as the game is running. So we're going to be putting a lot of things in here, but we want to still try to keep it as simple as possible, and I'll show you what I mean down the road. Before we get to any of that, though, we need to make our first sprite for the player that we're going to control. And to do that, we're going to need a variable. Now, variables are a very important concept when it comes to coding that I want to make sure you understand. So when we use JavaScript, we're going to create a new variable or declare a variable by the keyword var. Anytime we type var, that tells the computer we are making a new variable, and then we have to give it a name. So for this example, I'm going to give it the terrible name. You would never actually use this in your code. I'm just going to call my variable stuff. So now, what exactly is a variable? Think of a variable as a box. We can put any kind of information inside our variable, just like you could put just about anything in a box. So we can use variables to store numbers. We can store words and character strings. We can even store sprites as a variable. And this is effective because in our code, whenever we want to retrieve whatever we put in that box, we can just call the name of that variable. So anytime in my code I call stuff, the computer is going to grab whatever we put in this box and then let us change it, add to it, take something out of it, change the values, throw paint on it. Whatever we want to do, we can do that just by calling the word stuff. So let's make our first variable for a sprite for our player. Now if we click on the Sprites tab in the toolbox, the very first block it gives us does exactly what we need to do. So they call this create sprite, but as you can see it begins with the var keyword, so it's creating a new variable. So let's click and drag, there we go, drag this, and we want to put this up at the top, actually before our draw loop. Now the reason is because if we were to put it inside our draw loop, remember, this is going to run over and over again and start over and start over and start over. We would actually be creating and destroying our variable every single time the game ran, which isn't exactly what we want to do. So if we put it above the draw loop, it's going to set this up when the game starts running and then leave it there the entire time. So now we have to name our variable. And again, if this is going to be for our player, let's just type in the name player. Next it says it's creating the sprite, and then we have these parameters. Now this stands for the X position on the screen and the Y position, where this is going to be created. So again, if you turn on the grid, it'll help remind you how the number system works on the grid. The top left is 0, 0, X value 0, Y value 0. And the X and Y values go up to 400, so the bottom right corner would be 400, 400. So right now this is set to create it at 200, 200, which is going to be smack in the middle, and I think that's a good spot to start for now. Alright, so we actually have to make our sprite now that we have our variable. To do this, let's go up to our animation tab, and we're going to push this big button for a new animation. Now the one I picked out that I like is under the board games library. Now you're free, you could choose a different sprite as your player if you want to. I'm just gonna, I like this one on tab 7. I like this little piece, yellow board, blah 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 blah, something or other. It's just a board game piece, so I'm gonna click on that. And you see it's going to enlarge it for us, and it actually shows what this looks like in individual pixels. So if you were patient enough, you could completely create your own sprites using some pixel art here. I don't have nearly the time for that, so I'm going to use this one and be happy with it. Now we need to rename our sprite, and I'm going to change the name of it to, what do I want to call this? Let's call this player sprite. Let's make a name as specific to what it is as we can. And notice I kept this as one word. I started with a lowercase letter, which is kind of the convention in JavaScript. And then I put a capital S for the second word, sprite. So let's try to name all our sprites in a similar way. So we have that. Let's go back to our code tab. Now that we've created the variable for the player, we can actually add the sprite into that player box. Again, thinking that a variable is like a box. To do that, we take this second block that says set animation. Let's drag this right under our player variable. So now we need to change this name to the variable we had before. So let's call this player.setAnimation. So this command is going to set whatever we did in the animation tab, and we need to just set this to player sprite. Alright, now if we hit run, nothing happens. Why not? What's wrong? Well, remember that computers are stupid. They can only do exactly what we tell them to do. The computer is not smart enough right now to figure out, oh, I actually want to see my sprite I put there. We have to directly tell the computer that we want to see the sprite. So to do that, if we click on our World tab, there is a function called Draw Sprites. Now remember, functions are kind of like verbs in grammar. They're actions, and we can tell that it's a function because at the end of the name we have these two parentheses with nothing in them. That's very common for all functions. So if we drag Draw Sprites over, and I want to actually put this inside of our draw loop. Now watch what happens when we run it. Hey, we have our sprite, our player is in the middle of the screen. So that command tells the game, actually draw on the screen, or just put on the screen whatever sprites we've come up with. Alright, so we have our player. Now we need to actually have our enemies. So we're going to make a new variable for our first enemy. So we're going to go back to sprites. We're going to drag this first variable and create sprite block in. And let's call this one UFO1. So this is going to represent the first UFO on the field or screen. I guess it's not a field, we're not playing soccer. So where should we put this? Let's put this somewhere up in this corner, I think. So looking at these values, maybe like around, we'll keep it simple. How about 300 on the X and 100 on the Y? So X 300 and Y 100. Alright, so now we have to actually make our sprite for this. Let's go back to the animation tab. We're going to click new animation. And the one I like is also in the board games library, the very last page. I'm going to take UFO blue. It comes in a few different colors. And that could be cool because in our game we could maybe have different colored UFOs that all behave slightly differently. So let's change the name of this. Let's try to keep similar to what we did with our player sprite. Let's call this UFO blue sprite. All right. Back to our code. Let's attach this to our UFO1 variable. So again, we take this under sprites, the second block that says set animation, drag it right underneath, and now we need to change this first name to match our variable name. So let's change it to UFO1, and now this block is saying for the variable UFO1, we're going to set its animation to whatever sprite we choose, which we want to be UFO blue sprite. Alright, let's run this, and it's there. But it looks really big. I'm not liking this. It's too big for me. So we can actually make this smaller. And the way we do that is right here. We have this property called the scale. Scale basically just means how large something is. So if we take this and let's drag it right underneath our set animation, and you guessed it, the first thing we need to do is type the name of the variable we are modifying, which again is UFO1.scale. And now we set a number value for what scale we want. A scale of 1 would be the same size it already is. So if we want it to be smaller, we need a smaller number. I'm going to go with 0.4. So it's going to be about 40% of the original size, a little smaller than half of this. Let's reset, and yeah, I think that's a much better size for a game, so we're going to stick with that. So we're just about done. We have one more thing to do, which is going to be to create one more UFO sprite to try to catch us, and I think this is a good time to leave you with a little challenge. So what I want you to do is to go ahead and create a new variable called UFO2 that will represent our second UFO sprite. Then I want you to assign the same UFO sprite that we already made to this variable. And lastly, I want you to position the starting position of the sprite to be near the bottom left of the screen. Look at what we've already done as an example for you, and I think you should be able to figure it out. I'll give you the solution to this in the next video, so good luck, and I will see you soon.